Would members of the Licensing and Standards Committee please report to Committee Room 1 for quorum? Please report to Committee Room 1 for quorum. Would members of the Licensing and Standards Committee please report to Committee Room 1 for quorum? Please kindly report to Committee Room 1 for quorum. Thank you.
We have quorum, and we are going to reconvene with the meeting. The next speaker, Gary Kimmel, followed by Robert Field and Israel Quintero. Gary Kimmel. Gary Kimmel. My last call. Gary Kimmel. Robert Field. Good afternoon, Mr. Field. Thank you for waiting. Good to have you here.
Well, my notes say good morning, but it's now good afternoon.
Please go ahead.
Councilors and committee members, my name is Robert Field. I am here today as president of the Graydon Hall Tenants Association, and I'm representing tenants in almost 1,000 rental units in the Don Mills and York Mills area. That's Ward 34. I'm also on the board of the Federation of Metro Tenants Associations. I want to speak briefly to you about our position on Airbnb. We use that term, but of course it's the wider group of people that provide these services and the licensing required. What I have to say is likely not going to be new to you, and I may be reiterating what some of the staff or other presenters have recommended. Our main concern with Airbnb is not with the people who rent out a spare room in their house or apartment. This accounts for about 50%, as we understand, of the Airbnb's business, and we're leaving those fine folks to do that in the future. Our concern is what the other half of the business is. The commercial operators with multiple listings and units who take rental units off the market and then rent them out to Airbnb, as has been deputed by our friends with Fair BNB. The loss of units is serious. As we've seen earlier, there's a low rental availability. It's ravaged by rental markets in a number of cities. Currently, our models assume that about 2,000 to 4,000 units may have already been lost in Toronto. This represents a massive amount of lost housing. This has always been our main concern with Airbnb operations or the like. Finally, there's a major impact on rents due to Airbnb's reduction of the rental supply. And this is something I'm personally concerned about as well. A study released in the Wall Street Journal I was told about states that for every 10% increase in Airbnb units, there's a 4% increase in rent. As Airbnb has doubled in Toronto between 2014 and 2016, this leads to something like a $1,000 annual rent increase in downtown Toronto for a two-bedroom apartment. So in effect, taking the regular units out of the mix, other operators are now jumping into the fray and upping the rents. And at a time where our associations are concerned about above guideline increases, this just adds to the pain. Overall, we support the regulation of short-term rentals to ensure that operators register both themselves and their approved principal residents as the property they are renting. A plan for effective and proactive enforcement would protect both the city's supply of long-term rental housing and the affordability of rental housing.
Thank you, sir. Any questions? Thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
Israel Quintero, followed by Stephen Taft, Jeffrey Stern, Demis Lash, Emily Dorchley, and Jackie Porter. Please go ahead. Thank you.
Councilors, my name is Israel Quintero. I am a super host of Airbnb. I own a duplex, a semi-detached in a forgotten corner of Mr. DiGiorgio's ward. And I've been doing Airbnb for almost a year. I've been doing homestay for almost 10 years before Airbnb. Without Airbnb, I cannot have my house. I will be in the army of people looking for renting, but Airbnb allows me to keep the house after my divorce. And honestly, I feel being attacked by all your measurements. The ones I want to propose to abolish is the 180 cap. I have 3 rental units in my house, 3 rooms, and the rate is about 26, 27, 29. If I go beyond 30, they are not going to be rented. So it's very basic. So if I have the whole year doing that, it's going to be barely like $30,000, just about to get the HST or whatever. Oh, by the way, I have to apologize because I am a very layman. I have no fancy words or whatever, right? And nobody in my community complains about me. I don't think I have to ask my neighbor if he wants me to see one guy walking, because what is the next step? Getting a checkpoint to ask for ID and what is your business here? I don't think so. As long as I comply with all the bylaws, I don't have to ask for permission for anybody to do things in my house. Now, none of my neighbors complains about me, but I complain about my neighbors all the time. Noise, garbage, and actually I have been treating with Mr. the Giorgio office for quite some time with many of these issues. So that's the one thing I want to also add to, not all the Airbnbs are the same. We have good guys, we have bad guys, and it's very unfortunate what we hear about the lady having an Airbnb or Roman orgy happening all the time. In my case, I consider to be very, very honest. I have a job, and still with Airbnb thing and with my job, I just barely make the ends meet. Any taxing or things like that, it has to be fair because I cannot be compared to the guys who has 3 or 4 rental units, maybe cottages. I don't have that. My car is a piece of garbage. And just keep in mind that there are people like me who tries to make ends meet. Airbnb is a tool. Before Airbnb, I was using Kijiji, a paper in the grocery store. So I'm just the little guy. Don't forget about me. I belong to Toronto as well. I want to keep my house. I don't want to be pushed out of my house just because, you know what? Some Airbnb wants to have their own hotels thing. I'm done.
Thank you, Mr. Quintero. We have some questions for you.
Yes.
Is Councilor Jones?
Thank you, sir. Thank you for coming, and certainly it was interesting that I heard your comments. Do you live in the house?
Yes, sir. Semi-detached.
When people are coming from Airbnb to rent a house, you're in the house?
100%, 360 days.
Okay, so your neighbors across the street beside you, they know you're running an Airbnb?
They do, and I clean the driveway, and there's no problem
So
and everything.
you would be okay licensing Airbnbs with the operator living in the house? No
It doesn't
problem.
affect me. I mean, actually, I think it's a good.
Okay, but I mean, you would be in favor of this, so we don't run into problems like we heard just before lunch from the previous speaker.
Oh, nothing like that,
Exactly.
never.
So you wouldn't be this bad operator that blocks in the individual. So you would like to be at the house, you would like your neighbors to know that you're running an Airbnb, you want to be a good quality neighbor, and you want to enjoy the people that are coming to town to stay with you, with your neighbors.
And they do that already.
Okay. So let me ask one further question. Would you be in agreement that we ask all the operators to have police clearance before they run an Airbnb?
I do have one.
You got a police clearance?
Because, like I mentioned, I was doing homestay before, and in order to work for a homestay, because I may hold teenagers or something like that.
So all the operators then, you're not objecting to the operators getting a police clearance?
No, sir.
Okay, thanks very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Any other questions? Just a question, a follow-up to Councilor Giannis. So would you be in agreement that anyone else within the rental market that rents an apartment, a condominium, and any other unit should have police clearance as well?
Well, I think it's a benefit for the guest because honestly, I trust in Airbnb that they check for
No, I get it. I heard the answer that you gave to Councilor Janis. My question is, will anyone else who is in the rental market will have to have the same kind of clearance? And I'm talking about hundreds of thousands of landlords and tenants as well. So it's, how do you see that?
I think it's going to be a good idea.
Point of order, Chair.
It costs just $20 to get a police clearance and a week. That's it. Is that your question, sir?
Thank you for your answer.
My pleasure.
What's your point? Good. Any other questions? Thank you. Not to you. Stephen Tatz? Stephen Tatz? Jeffrey Stern? Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
Good to have you here. Thank you for the long wait.
Thank you, sir.
Floor is yours, please.
Hi.
Okay, 3 minutes.
Good afternoon. My name is Jeffrey Stern, and I am from Toronto Acorn. Thanks for letting me speak today. Being a membership group of low to moderate income people gives Acorn a unique view of the housing crisis in Toronto. Our members, people like myself, struggle to pay the skyrocketing rents in the city. Our members are the people on the long wait list for subsidized housing in the city. And yes, our members are the people in the city that have the most to lose from Airbnb, turning our housing into hotel rooms for yuppie tourists. That's why Acorn is a proud member of Fair B&B Coalition. We need to be building deeply affordable housing in this city. Letting Airbnb operate free of rules and regulations is destroying affordable housing. It's the opposite of what this council wants and what this city needs. Our partners in the Fair B&B Coalition can speak more about the policy details. Toronto Acorn is here today to simply say we are watching this debate closely and that we think tight rules on Airbnb is a key step towards our goal of an affordable city. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Stern. Any questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
For your presentation. Denise Lash?
Good afternoon. My name is Denise Lash. I'm the president of CAI Canada, which is an association that represents about 32,000 members worldwide. It's an association that recently started in Canada, and it's comprised of condominium managers, condominium directors, residents, and condominium professionals. I'm also the founder of my own law firm called Lash Condo Law. We represent about 400 condominium corporations. So I'm very familiar with this issue. I've dealt with both sides. I represent condominium corporations that in their declaration permit short-term rentals, and the properties have been marketed and sold, and there are investors that have bought into the buildings that use their units for short-term rentals. And then I represent condominium corporations where they prohibit rentals that are shorter than 6 months or a year, and they're trying to deal with some of the issues that have arisen because of short-term rentals. Recently, one of our buildings, which permits short-term rentals, wanted to prevent it. And so they took steps to try to amend their declaration, and the residents did not want to go forward with that. They wanted the short-term rentals. And the reason this corporation wanted to abolish the short-term rentals because they're dealing with issues, parties, noise, wear and tear. And I think those are the major concerns that we hear about. Airbnb had approached our office and approached CAI Canada about working out a solution. And so there's a friendly buildings program that you may have heard of today that was launched in the US and now going international. It's now in Toronto for the first time with this building. It seems to address the issues. So in buildings that permit short-term rentals, this is an agreement which allows the condominium corporation to participate and get revenue. So not only is a resident getting the revenue much needed for somebody who can't afford to, to carry the unit, but now the condominium corporation benefits from it. And Airbnb was very open to making sure that it covers all the concerns of the condominium corporation, so address the noise and nuisance factor. So if there's a complaint, that the condominium corporation notifies Airbnb, and Airbnb will take steps to prevent that particular owner from renting their unit. That is more than what we have now. So under the Condominium Act, the condominium corporation and its board cannot levy penalties. They have a hard time. They use our office. Tons of legal fees are spent, and it's really difficult to address this issue. With this friendly buildings, it has really helped.
Thank you for your presentation. Any questions? Thank you.
Okay.
The next speaker is Emily Digley. Followed by Jackie Porter. Good afternoon, ma'am. Good to have you
afternoon,
here.
councillors.
Thank you for waiting.
So you all have my written copy of my deputation. I ask you to read that, but I also am going to speak a couple of other things because my 3 minutes. First of all, accessibility. How many of these Airbnbs are wheelchair accessible and follow the standards of wheelchair accessibility, basic AODA? Many of our own subsidized units that claim they're accessible are not truly properly up to code or standards. My other issue is, and I'm with Fair B&B for a lot of reasons. I live in an area where there's a lot of problems with B&B. I live in an area where condos have been bought by outside developers and investors and just are rented out to Airbnb. I'm sad to see the appointed councillor is not here, since she represents an area of massive development down in the Pan Am housing area. But I'm also worried about fire safety. I'm worried about people that are, I have friends with disabilities and their parents who own their own home, and the only way they can stay in it is they used to do long-term rentals. Well, my friend's mother was attacked. My friend's mother has had problems with long-term rental people just destroying the apartments. They have 2 apartments, there's 1 bedroom and a 2-bedroom. They've gone to Airbnb because they have no other choice. The biggest problem is safety. So with the proper rules and regulations, I think that we can do this. We can think about this in an equal and demonstrative way, but also I want to see that at least there is regulations when it comes to accessibility and fire safety. I believe in Airbnb, but I also believe in rules and regulations to make it fair for everybody, not just the able-bodied. Many disabled people I know, including many deaf friends, have Airbnb because they have no other way to stay in their homes or afford to be in Toronto. That's all I'm asking. I thank you, and it is good to see that we are doing this, and that, thank you for listening.
Thank you so much for your presentation. Any questions?
Of course.
Thank you.
Cheers.
And the last deputant is Jackie Poor.
Just when the baby starts to become fussy, that's my luck, I guess. My name's Jacqueline Porter. I'm a renter in Toronto. My husband and I moved here in 2016 when my husband got a position as a professor at the University of Toronto. I'm a lawyer. When we moved here in 2016, houses near U of T were renting for about $3,000 a month. That was affordable for us. We decided, unfortunately for us, to get a furnished rental for a year to ease our transition to Toronto. And when that ended this past year, we looked at the market around U of T again, and for rentals, there was virtually nothing. And what there was starting at $4,200 a month. So that's in a year, okay? Between the two of us, my husband and I earn almost $250,000 a year. That's a pretty significant amount of money. But renting a house near U of T and paying for daycare for 2 children would have taken 70% of our net income every month, okay? So who can afford to live in these places now? We ended up having to move out to Coxwell to find an affordable rental, and even there, tiny 3-bedroom houses are going for $3,000 a month. I'm here today because I'm concerned not only about my family and where we're gonna live if our current lease is not renewed in a year, but I'm concerned about the 80% of other people in Toronto who earn less than we do. With respect to the bylaw, when I reviewed the bylaw, I was very concerned by what I saw. In my opinion, there are 4 things this bylaw needs to do in order to be effectively enforced. I've provided a written submission that sets those out, and I encourage you to review that. I'm just going to touch on 1 or 2 of them now. First of all, think about the goal of your bylaw. The goal of the entire process here is to limit short-term rentals to a person's principal residence, right? That's what we're here to do. That's the whole point. So you're going to hand out registration numbers to people, though, without requiring them to prove that the short-term rental is in their principal residence. Isn't that the whole point of the bylaw, to limit it to their principal residence? How can you not require them to prove that before getting a registration number? My current place out at Coxwell, the driveway is actually too small to fit a car. So about a couple months ago, I came down to City Hall in person and got a street parking permit. Now, to get a street parking permit in the city, as you know, you have to go in person to City Hall and you have to prove that you live in the neighborhood where you want the permit. Are you telling me that you're going to do less to protect long-term rentals in this city than you are to protect the supply of parking spaces? Because that's what it seems like. I see I'm out of time, so I'll leave it at that.
Thank you so much for your presentation. Questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we have concluded all the deputations at this point, and now questions to staff. I'm sorry, we are done with the deputations. We did extend the deputations. Did you register? Okay, so this morning actually we did add more names to the registration list, and the deadline was at 10 o'clock. So at this point we have done with the deputations. Thank you. So now questions to staff. Members of the committee, any questions? Questions to staff? Councilor Janis.
Thank you, Chair. You to staff. How many Airbnb or similar type units are they in the city of Toronto?
Through you, Mr. Chair, we can provide, based on the data that was provided by Airbnb, they were around 16,000 listings overall. That goes up and down on a daily basis, and it does not include all the other platforms.
With the other platforms, can you give us a guesstimate of what we're looking at? Are we looking at 20,000?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I wouldn't be able to guess. They are notably smaller. We did say, what did we say in the report? Yeah, about 20,000.
Okay.
So that would include all, I think, everybody that we identified.
How much would it cost us? We're having a new tax, which is called the destination tax, and it's 4%, I've been advised. These 20,000 units, what would it cost us in income? I mean, how much money would we be missing if Airbnb was to continue? How much money will not we be getting in less in our coffers?
So through you, Mr. Chair, just to provide some clarity, currently the city just has a voluntary destination marketing fee, or that destination marketing program. It's 3% paid by the hotels, and that supports Tourism Toronto. There is a report forthcoming, pending legislation from the province, legislation forthcoming that would speak to the opportunity for the city to impose a hotel tax or a tax that would also be applicable to the short-term rental. The direction and reference in an economic development report that's actually going to CDRC tomorrow, or Economic Development Committee, thank you, is anywhere from 4%, and we had one motion looking at 10%. But that is a matter that's currently being reviewed by corporate finance and will be subject of a report at a future time.
So if we were to have 20,000 Airbnb units, 180 days, 180 nights per year, at $100 per night, would you be surprised if we would be missing $14,400,000 from this destination tax?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'm always challenged with how many zeros to put into those counts.
Let me then break it down for you. 180 nights at $100 a night, that is 18,000 per house per annum. 0.4 is $720 destination tax per house. 20,000 Airbnb units, that's 14,400,000 that the city will be missing.
So through you, Mr. Chair, I think Councillor Karygiannis, I would suggest that the particulars in respect to projected revenue from a potential future tax is a matter that is in the purview of corporate finance and not one that I should be guessing at.
Should the operators not get permission from, or at least advise their neighbors? We heard one lady today that she was caged in her house. She wasn't able to get out because she felt she was in fear to get out. Should we not ask the operators to advise their neighbors or get permission from their neighbors? I mean, when I asked everybody, nobody seemed to have an objection to that.
So through you, Mr. Chair, I think the matter would have to be discussed as to what extent the expectation is. If it's simply a matter of courtesy to advise neighbors is one thing. If it's a matter of a mandated requirement and a notification with an objection process, then that's an entirely different nature of the beast, as it were.
Should the operators, do you feel comfortable with the operators having a police clearance? I mean, we do that for Uber, we do that for taxis, we do that for other things.
So through you, Mr. Chair, it is not something that we had recommended in the framework in June nor in this report. It's certainly, if you want us to delve into it further, we're free to do so. You know, part of it was looking at, this is about a use of a property, the place that someone resides, the principal residence component being foundational to this, and it's someone sharing their home. And, you know, I'll say the goal, and when we approach this, was to strike a balance between adequacy and sufficiency of the regulation and the information we require in the front end versus an overly burdensome regime that people may not comply with.
But I mean, shouldn't we also worry about the safety of the visiting public when they're visiting and staying at somebody's house?
So through you, Mr. Chair, I've dedicated my working life to public safety, so I don't know that necessarily a clearance does all that. All it does is identify things for which someone has been found guilty. You know, people need to practice their own personal safety efforts as well. But certainly, if it's something you'd like us to rethink and come back with, we're happy to consider.
Thank you.
Any other questions? From staff? Yeah. Councilor Burnside?
My apologies if these questions have been asked before. 180 nights per year. What's the rationale for that?
So through you, Mr. Chair, what we've said is where a person is sharing a portion of their home, so the 3 bedrooms, up until yesterday, the secondary suite, but what's currently in play, the 3 bedrooms, is unlimited, 365 days a year. It's when the entire unit is being offered for short-term rental that we've said no more than 180 days, which is approximately 6 months. So again, founded in the principle that this is a person's principal residence, it's not unreasonable to expect that the person principally resides there at least half the year.
Okay, but if you have a room within your residence, that's okay?
365.
Okay, that's good. Okay, pardon me. I know that the secondary suite, as it were, was taken out yesterday given concerns about affordability and whatnot. Is that counterintuitive?
Through you, Mr. Chair, so certainly it's a balance of philosophy. It's a balance of people having the right to use their home and portions of their home in an effort, as we've heard from some deputants, to earn additional income to help them afford their homes. And the other side of the house is that we do have a shortage of available rental housing in the city. So that our proposal was that one secondary suite within a premise would be permitted. It was the choice and wisdom of planning growth management to say that not be the case, and that will be the discussion that goes at council.
But that secondary suite would be limited to 180 days per year, no?
No. So through you, Mr. Chair, so this is where it got a bit complicated yesterday. If it's the principal residence of the person, so Paul, who deputed earlier,
Yes.
who has a secondary suite, he's there 365 days a year. It's only when the entire unit is
Okay, gotcha.
rented, then that house would be 180 days, as well as the tenant in a secondary suite. So if that secondary suite is tenanted, that person would be able to participate by short-term renting rooms, 365. If that tenant of the secondary suite had vacated, then the entire unit secondary suite of their principal residence, then that would be 180 days. So it's really around the 180 days applies to the principal residence of the operator.
So how would you actually enforce, because it's great to regulate, but I don't know how you enforce, how would you enforce the secondary suite prohibition?
So through you, Mr. Chair, that is something that we would have to determine. Certainly, as you know, Councillor Burnside, enforcement is challenging in all respects. What this would do in the front end would not permit someone to register a secondary suite as an available unit registered for short-term rental. From the enforcement perspective, it would come down to how we investigate and determine the portion of the property that is being used, how it is being used, if the portion of the property being used is deemed a secondary suite. So there's a number of layers in how we would have to address that.
And you'd need resources. Will you be trying to figure out how many or much resources you would need in time for council?
So through you, Mr. Chair, in the report in the financial impact section, it does reference some additional staffing relative to the anticipated registration and licensing fee.
But I'm talking about the secondary suite prohibition, because that's a whole different animal.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair, and this is the challenge. We don't know what the enforcement landscape looks like until we know the full regime that we are looking to enforce and the aspects of that regime that we are looking to enforce.
Okay, and then we heard the last deputation regarding, I'll say, a party house, as it were. What's the provision for these problematic properties, as it were? Because it would appear that the company in question didn't really take it seriously.
Right. So through you, Mr. Chair, that absolutely was a component of the proposed regulation that we put a great deal of thought into, recognizing that the party house scenario is a small percentage. We do not get a lot of complaints, but for the neighbor, it is a massive issue.
Absolutely right.
And for the neighborhood. So recommendation number 7 speaks about an authority to refuse or cancel an operator's registration if there are issues such as the party houses that are causing community disorder or public nuisance. So we have embedded a tool to address those.
And you don't anticipate that there would be some lengthy process to go through to do so?
No, through you, Mr. Chair, certainly we want to ensure that any process where we may be withdrawing someone's right to or opportunity to do something is subject to due process and transparency. We have outlined that in the report, what that would look like. It does not, you know, the other piece of this we were trying to balance was not creating an overly burdensome or bureaucratic or you know, another quasi-judicial body to deal with these issues. So I think we have struck a balance in ensuring procedural fairness, due diligence, but flexibility in our ability to respond to community issues when they do arise.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Sierra?
I just have, I apologize, members that couldn't be here this morning. So would the local councillors get the information and get the list of the locations in their wards?
Through you, Mr. Chair, that is not something that we had contemplated or made provision for. We will, through the registry, the operator registry, people are required to provide their name, address, et cetera. Any disclosure of that information is something that we would have to do pursuant to privacy screening and ensuring that we're according to all privacy laws.
And the reason I ask that is because if we have any of these problem ones where we get complaints, we're not aware that they are, and then we report it to you, we report it to the police, and then we don't know, right? So it probably would assist us in knowing, so we know where you can file the complaint to, you know, rather than wonder who it is.
So through you, Mr. Chair, in these particular scenarios, Councilor Nunziata, I would suggest if it was a noise issue or perhaps a land use issue, that you would be notifying MLS with the complaint. We have the registry. We would know if it was operating on a short-term rental registration or not. So there's the difference of being advised that it is operating as a short-term rental when an issue occurs versus an upfront disclosure of all the short-term rentals that exist, which again, before we do any disclosure of information, we always ensure that privacy is addressed accordingly.
Thank you.
Councilor Di Giorgio?
Yeah, just a very quick question with respect to point number 26. Basically says that anyone that contravenes the bylaw can be penalized up to a fine of $100,000. It also talks about the directors of a corporation who knowingly concur in the contravention. So how do we go after the directors of a corporation? Do they have personal liability? I don't understand that.
Do you want to answer? Or?
So those provisions are the ones that are mirroring the City of Toronto Act authority. The intent here is that where there's proof that the directors or officers have been informed of non-compliance, continue to allow it to occur, that they can in fact be charged and convicted for failing to take action or allowing the action to continue.
That includes the directors?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
And sorry, through you, Mr. Chair, and that is consistent with the other regulatory bylaws we have in respect to 545 and 546.
All right, thank you.
Any other questions? If not, I may have 2 or 3. So in essence, we have 3 reports dealing with these short-term rental regulations. This report deals with the regulation and the registration aspects. Then the other one is the one that was dealt with yesterday with planning growth in terms of the zoning aspect. And the next report that's coming to the executive, I believe on the 29th of this month, and that deals with the potential taxation aspect. Now, with regards to the secondary suites that were dealt with yesterday, within this report, we also have that recommendation embedded in the report. Is there any conflict with that? Between what happened yesterday with the secondary suites in relation to what is before us today?
So to you, Mr. Chair, certainly our regulatory regime and the provisions here were based on the permissions that we presented. So we would definitely have to have a look at any place where secondary suite may have been referenced or relied upon and make adjustments accordingly.
So a follow-up to that is, presently we have check and balances, especially as it relates to provincially mandated regulations, and I'm referring to the Residential Tenancy Act that protects any units that are rented out where we have tenants that they can complain if they are being kicked out or whatever. So those secondary suites, literally speaking, are protected. So my question to you within that frame of thought, if there is any potential second suites out there that are not being rented by choice, or they are not in compliance with the building code or fire code, but the potential is there. How do we differentiate in terms of regulating that? Just trying to have that sense of clarity, because we have a gray area there that's not crystal clear and that has a potential for legal or civil litigation out there. Is any thoughts on that you can share with us?
Yes, to you, Mr. Chair. It's very complicated. That is one thing we certainly saw discussing it yesterday. So yes, the RTA does govern those long-term tenancies. So someone who is a tenant in a lawful secondary suite is governed by that. We do know that there are cases, and the number we have is 1,759 secondary suites that we are aware of that have come in for a building permit at some point in time. We also know there are secondary suites that exist that, under legislation of the day, may have been appropriately built or constructed, but we don't have visibility on that. So we really don't know what the full number of secondary suites in homes is beyond those that we have come across. I think our ultimate goal, and the goal in all of this, including this regulation, is to recognize the activity, regulate it in a reasonable way, to ensure that we can ensure, to the extent that we can, that the appropriate laws are followed and the appropriate safety measures are in place. And I think that is a foundation of everything that we do. It's what we did with the apartment building bylaw as well. And we have people living in places that are probably not suited for human occupation.
So, given those challenges, it seems like we also have opportunities out there. Now, I'm just looking at your report right now. Do you still stand by your recommendations as it relates to the second suites, given what you just said?
So to you, Mr. Chair, when we proposed this regulation, we struck a balance between the people who own homes who need to rent for the secondary suites for affordability for them and people having access to housing. At the end of the day, this is going to be a matter that is adjudicated through council. I understand all sides of the coin here, and I think we'll have a very fulsome and interesting debate about the efficiency or sufficiency of whether secondary suites ought to be permitted or not. I don't think it's appropriate that I pass judgment. I made a recommendation based on the consultation that we did, the research we did, and what we felt struck a balance across all the varying interests, homeowners, tenants alike.
My hat's off to you. Thank you. Further questions, speakers? Any speakers on the item? Councillor DiGiorgio.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A couple of comments. First of all, this is a very, very sort of interesting topic, because I'm sure as we proceed there will be some consequences resulting from any decision that we make that we need to modify going forward. But in general, I'm supportive of the recommendations, and I will be moving to adopt the recommendations. At this point, I don't really want to make any amendments. I can just say that I grew up in a home sharing environment way back when, and I can tell you that the conditions in the home sharing environment that I grew up in were quite different than the home sharing environment today. So in that respect, it's a good thing, sort of modernized sharing accommodations. With respect to the secondary suites, I do have some concerns that I want to just think over. You know, not to give you a real sort of clear indication of what happens in my area, but secondary suites that are rented out in my area, I can't imagine that tourists would want to come and sort of live in some of those secondary suites that are being rented out on a long-term basis. So I don't see the concern about secondary suites taking away from the rental stock. Similarly, in a more lucrative sort of area of the city, again, I can't imagine that someone having the flexibility of renting a very good unit that might command somewhere like, say, $2,500 to $3,000 a month is going to take away from the rental stock if they choose to do it on a short-term basis, and tourists would very well probably want to be living in situations like that. So to sort of make a rule that says, you know, let's just forget about secondary suites and not, I don't think that's going to take us very far. That being said, like I said, I'll move the recommendations. There are a lot of positive things here. I think one gentleman said to, I can't remember, I think it was Jeremy Diaz, he said something like, if in fact we did allow secondary units to be rented out on a short-term basis, that we might bring forward many more people that would be willing to share their living accommodation if they knew that they could do it just on a very short-term basis. Great flexibility that people might want to take advantage of, so that there are positive to every side, no matter how you look at this thing. There's always you know, different ways of slicing it. So that being said, I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor DiGiorgio. Any other speakers? Vice Chair Karygiannis.
Chair, I do have a couple of motions that I'd like the staff to put up, please. Basically, what I'm looking for is a person, an operator, the recommendation is that it's an owner or tenant. What I'm stating is if the operator is a tenant, they should provide written authorization from the homeowner in compliance with all provincial regulations. The other recommendation is, again, when we're looking at tenants, they do provide proof of the tenants and proof that they live in the house. I would like to have the neighbors know that the houses are being rented as Airbnb, so I'm asking for a consent within a 100-meter radius from the house. Police clearance, again, for the operator to be present at the property during the rental, so we don't have the problems as we have. I'd like to see the fees go up from $50 to $100, from $5,000 to $10,000, and $2 per night. I mean, we're going to lose all kinds of revenue. As it stands right now, we'll be losing revenue of $46,800,000 on HST, but regardless of that, we will be losing $14,400,000 of the destination tax. If we take 180 nights per home at $100 per home, that's 18,000 houses per annum. 0.04% destination tax, that's $720 per house. 20,000 Airbnb units, that's $14,400,000 we'll be losing. I'm sure that the operators can pay $10,000 and people can pay $100 to register and $2 per night. Thank you.
That it? There's a lot of questions. Okay, Councilor Burnside. Okay, Councilor
Okay,
Luciano.
we don't have a copy of your motion, but can you scan down where, okay, a little slow because I'm getting dizzy. Okay, where it says that that you have to notify the neighbors. No, but hold on, I want to see what you put. Okay, that no one shall, and consent must be received by neighbors within 100-meter radius for houses and so how is that going to be done? Like,
the same way that right now, if you want to build something or you want to add something, you get consent and the notice is sent out, and people can have a way of objecting or not, or you go and collect signatures by, from your neighbors.
So you're suggesting that the staff send letters to everyone, 100-meter radius?
Or
and
the
ask-
person,
and ask
or
ask
the person goes
permission?
and collects signatures, either or.
Well, I mean, that's a little lengthy, isn't it? I mean, and it's actually costly too if you're sending out notices.
Any notices we send right now for anything else, it's at the expense of the person that's making the application. So if you're making an application to do a development, the expenses of sending the mail out come out of the developer's pocket. Now, you're going to be making money. You don't want to inconvenience your neighbors. Either go and knock at the doors and get their signatures, or the staff sends out a notice and says, hey,
Well-
so we don't have the same woman, I'm sorry you were not here before lunch. We don't have the situation where a woman was actually blocked in and she was scared to come out of her house.
Well, I mean, there's a big difference between a development application than a rental. So, okay, thanks. I just wanted clarification. I don't think it makes sense.
Councillor Burnside.
So, sorry, I can't read everything, but there was a mention here of proof of living in the house. How do you propose that we figure that one out?
Well, Councillor, I want to thank you for your questions. I have people that buy a house and they are not in the house and they're traveling. So if you're renting Airbnb, you have to be at night. Should there be a disturbance, you're there to answer it.
But how do we prove it? How do they prove that they're living in the house?
Well, if there's complaints that come to the city and the person is not there, and there's complaints that the 911 responds to the noise, that means they're not there, so their license should be yanked.
Oh, okay, so it's more like, sort of like driving. You have to have proof of a driver's license, but only when you get stopped, really. Okay.
Indeed.
Got that. Okay. I think you mentioned a deputy.
You do not want to rent a house and you're not there. And like the lady said before, she was fear of her life to come out because the resident wasn't there. So you need to make sure that the person that's renting the house out is there.
No, I understand that. No, that's cool. Thanks. So you heard Ms. Cook respond to my question about these problem properties are actually fairly rare, and you heard, I think you heard that the city has a mechanism for that. But you don't think that goes far enough? That's my question.
You know, I mean, we heard from the lady there was a party going on at her house. I also heard in my street last July that I had to call the cops at 3 o'clock in the morning because of an individual that had rented his house out at Airbnb, and at night at 3 o'clock in the morning there was a lot of noise. So, I mean, it's unfair to the longtime residents that are there not being able to make sure that the person that's renting out the Airbnb residence is not staying there.
Right, but I guess that could also apply to teens whose parents go away for the weekend, right?
Well, you know, that's your neighbor, that's your neighbor's son that is there, and certainly you're accountable to your neighbor. I mean, these kids grew up in the neighborhood. This is not somebody that just comes in and says, I don't give a damn about the neighborhood, and I'm going to do whatever I need, and I'm out of here today.
Okay.
A teen is going to be there. He's going to be answerable when his parents come back, and the parents will certainly come and speak as a neighbor and say, hey, you know, your son did a party, and we appreciate it, you know, not to
After,
be done.
but I think that's after the fact. That doesn't help the person that's scared to come out of the house at night. But anyway,
Well, I mean,
I'll keep moving. I got more questions. How do we, and thank you, how do we enforce this notification provision? So the requirement
that
this
could be
100
something
meters,
that could
do we
be-
have a roving team or anything?
No, this could be done at the platform of Airbnb. Airbnb can be responsible for making sure that they get the consent from the neighbors, and at any given point in time that the executive director can take a look at it, as we're doing with Uber. I mean, we'll let Uber self-regulate. If Airbnb wants to be regulated, well, then we can push it on to them and say, hey, make sure that you got the compliance from the neighbors, and if we need to, then we can check it out.
Yeah, this is getting very complicated for me, so I'm going to just ask you one last question.
Okay.
In terms of you talked about foregone revenue. I just want to clarify that I think you mentioned 46 million. That's HST, which is
HST,
federal,
14,400,000 in destination.
Right. So in the HST, have you had conversations with the federal government that would indicate that whatever our take in HST is, which I don't even know that it's anything, that they would be reducing our take of that 46 million?
Councillor, let me just give you the numbers again. If a Airbnb operator operates for 180 nights at $100 per night, that is $18,000. He or she does not have to collect HST. At 13%, of 18,000, that's $2,340 per house per annum.
Okay, hold on.
Now,
But I
20,000, hold on a
No,
second,
with all
hold
due
on, you
respect.
asked the question.
No,
let me
but you're not giving me
give
the answer.
Give me the courtesy to
That-
finish,
that-
please. Give me
Mr.
the
Chair,
courtesy to finish.
I don't need a math lesson here. What I'm trying to understand, my question, very direct, was, did you have conversation with any federal minister, probably the revenue minister, about the implications of lost revenue to what the city may or may not get as a proportion of HST? That's my only question.
Well, the math is there, I'm trying to give it to you.
I understand
And you're
math.
asking me if I had... You don't need to have a conversation with the federal minister in order to do the math, Counselor. If you want to have a...
Well, anyway, I guess that's...
Counselor, I find your question to
Okay,
be
no, but I have
condescending.
one more question.
The
This has
math
led
is
to
there.
another question.
Now, if you don't like the math and you want to sidetrack from the question, that's a different story. The math is simple.
So just to clarify, I understand the math, I don't like the answer, but that's...
Well, that's too bad if you don't like the answer. The math is there.
Well, no, I'm okay, don't worry, there's no need to get heated. My last question, you talked about these 4%.
And that comes straight from right here.
Right.
Destination tax.
The destination from where? From the
Destination
deputy city
tax.
manager?
Yep.
Okay.
I've asked him what's the
Right.
destination tax.
So, okay, now, my understanding is that that aspect of this whole home sharing debate, that destination tax, has yet to be decided and is going before executive. Is that your understanding, or do I not know what's
If
going
it's
on?
going before the executive, when we're going to apply the destination taxes, I'm sure that's going to come before your committee, the executive, and you certainly are bound to support it. That is going to have 4%, and if you want me to do the math again, I can.
Thank you.
$180
Okay, no,
night,
no, this is-
$100 a night.
Any other
0.4%,
questions? Councilor Janis.
720 times 20,000 homes, 14
Is
million.
Councilor Janis?
This has been very helpful, I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Any other questions? If not, any other speakers before we wrap up? I know we are going to miss a quorum very soon. Any other speakers? Otherwise, I will speak. And I'll be very brief. First and foremost is I want to thank all the deputants for making your presentations and with that level of passion and understanding at the same time. And I was listening very carefully to what you have said, and thank you all for being here. Also, I want to thank city staff for an excellent report, for going through all the public consultations and all of that. You have done an amazing job to bring these recommendations forward. Thank you so much. With regards to the recommendation that's before from Councilor Karygiannis, I will ask members of the committee not to support these recommendations for many, many reasons. I'm not going to get into it. The council has the prerogative to bring them at City Council. That's another venue to do it, not at this committee. So I will be voting against that. The purpose of what's before us within the municipal licensing standards is simply to, on the short-term rentals, is the regulating aspect as well as the registration as it relates to the hosts and also the platforms. There was a report.
Are you moving any motions right now?
Oh, yes, and I'm moving another motion, if you allow me, is motion A, that the Executive Director of Municipal Licensing Standards review the submissions and report directly to City Council on December the 6th, 2017. If she wishes to clarify or modify any recommendations as a result of her review. The reason why I'm moving this recommendation is, as we heard from deputants, there were a number of submissions made that, in my opinion, have have quite a bit of essence that will add, perhaps, to the debate at City Council. And I think that would be appropriate to direct those recommendations and those submissions to the Executive Director of Municipal Licensing for her review, if needed, to have a supplementary report before City Council. And I have, I'll be hoping that the same thing was done or is going to be done with the other two standing committees of council. We heard from the deputants this morning. I heard from one of them, Jennifer Graham, who mentioned that, together with her husband and children, that how important it is for them to rent the rooms on the ground floor. I was paying close attention to what she had to say and how that supplementary income will help them to pay the mortgage and utility bills. And that's the kind of messages that I have heard, not only within Ward 17, where I have the honor of representing it, from hundreds and hundreds of families that are relying on this. And I have a real understanding of how people are struggling to survive out there, especially when you have huge mortgages out there, when bills are being increased all the time. And it's quite tough out there to survive, especially if you don't have a six-figure salary. If you are working on part-times here and there, it's very difficult. We heard from Mr. Quintero, who clearly indicated what he has to go through. We heard from a gentleman that he said that's 50 years old or older, and how difficult it is for him to find a job. And he's been struggling, and the only venue of revenue for him and his savior has been renting out a room or 2 rooms or his secondary floor. All of that has so much merit, in my opinion, and that's one of the reasons that I believe that's extremely important to deal with something. Here we have a platform, a disruptive platform, the same thing that we had with Uber, but Airbnb and any other technologies, they're here to stay, like is happening in other jurisdictions around the world. So what has been done from our city staff, literally speaking, is bring that sense of understanding how to move forward and how to, at the same time, we have to be sensitive with what we are dealing with. We are dealing also with the crisis in City of Toronto when it comes to affordable housing. We have to be very mindful that we protect affordable housing because a lot of people are struggling to survive out there as well. So to create that sense of balance is a real challenge. But within that challenge, we can also find opportunities. And on that note, I want to thank you all once again, and we'll move on to the next round. So we have some motions to deal with. The first motion, it comes in order. That's from the chair. Motion A is any submissions that we have received from deputants. I'm sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. My apologies. The first one is motion C from the Vice Chair, Councilor Jim Karygiannis. Is all those in favor? Against? Absolutely. No, we have a recorded vote. Is all those in favor? Councilor Karygiannis. Against? Nunciara, Di Giorgio, Palacio, Burnside. If else. The second motion is to refer all the submissions to city staff if needed to bring a supplementary report to City Council. All those in favor? Against? Carry. Thank you. On the item as amended, all those in favor? Recorded vote. Councilors Nunciara, Di Giorgio, Palacio, Burnside. Against? Karygiannis. Thank you, everyone. Motion to adjourn. Councilor Karygiannis. All those in favor? Thank you.